The Hot Seat.
Welcome to the Hot Seat, a debate segment where ideas clash and insights spark. I'm your host, Hongbin Jeong. Now, if you've been keeping track of car prices here in Singapore, you'll know the pain. A certificate of entitlement for a family car can now cost more than the car itself. Taking a quick look at the latest bidding exercise in July now, COE premiums closed higher across the board. For smaller cars in Category A, premiums closed over 101,000 Sing dollars, up by 3% from the last exercise. Meanwhile, COE premiums for most more powerful cars in Category B rose to more than $119,000, up by about 3,000. So for many Singaporeans, owning a vehicle feels increasingly out of reach. But is this just the price of living in a land-scarce city, or is the COE system itself due for a rethink? Again, should Singapore's COE systems be, reformed to better account for social equity, or would doing so create more problems than it solves? Well, before we hear from our guests and dive deeper into this debate, here's a disclaimer. The views and arguments presented by our interviewees do not necessarily reflect their personal beliefs or opinions. Instead, they are here to provide a fresh perspective on the topic at hand. On that note, if you'd like to send some questions in for our guests or send in your opinions, feel free to WhatsApp us at 88550893 or leave a comment on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, as we're currently streaming live on those platforms as well. Now, without further ado, joining us today is Kwee Neng, who is the managing partner at One Strategic Consulting, to share with us why Singapore's COE system should be reformed to better account for social equity. And we also have Terence, who's assistant professor of strategy and entrepreneurship at the Chian School of Business at SMU, who will try to convince us otherwise. Welcome to the show, both.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, just to start off, I have a question for both of you here. Now, the original purpose of the COE was to limit congestion and preserve road capacity. But given that there are concerns that it may not adequately address the needs of certain groups with mobility challenges, do you think the current system is flawed or not? Perhaps, Terence, we can go with you first.
Sure. Well, in Singapore, we have very limited space, and that includes road space, a part of the land that we devote for roads as well. So it's like trying to share or divide a small loaf of bread among a million people. And you can think about the government not having a lot of superpowers to do that. And however we divide that small loaf of bread, somebody's going to say, hey, I deserve more than the crumbs, So this is, I think, the situation where we're at. And I would say the only superpower that the government really has here is a lot of subsidies in terms of giving us a world-class public transport system, which suits most of our needs here. So in that sense, I wouldn't say that it's any more unfair than to say that, hey, we've got 6 million people now, we need more rain, please give us more rain. I think it's no more unfair than that. So I think it's what we could do, and it's just not very productive to keep doing the rain dance otherwise.
Kwee Neng, what are your thoughts?
So it says on the tin that COEs are meant to reduce traffic congestion. I bet if you were to do a straw poll of all the motorists stuck in jams right now, they would probably say that, hey, we pay $7 billion a year to solve traffic congestion, but traffic congestion is still here. Most experts will agree that COE is an extremely blunt instrument to solve traffic congestion. So if you were to take it from that point of view, then perhaps it is flawed in terms of using COEs to address an issue like traffic congestion. But I would also like to maybe take another angle, and that is what are the social outcomes COEs have brought to Singapore. It's been here since 1990, and during that period of time, a lot has changed. We have become the world's fastest aging nation. Our total birth rates have actually fallen from 1.82 to 1.25. Some blame it on the highest cost of living, of which owning a car is probably a contributor to that. And on top of that, I think we are also in a position where our population has literally gone from 3 million to 6 million right now. So the COE system has largely stayed the same while so much has changed to affect the demand for transportation in Singapore. And so I would say that there are plenty of reasons why I think that the COE system can be enhanced to adapt to the changing needs of Singaporeans.
Definitely. Well, Singapore's COE premiums have crossed $100,000 for some car categories in recent years, pricing out many middle-income families. So, Terence, in that case, is it fair that car ownership in Singapore is effectively gated by who has the money to afford one, even for families with legitimate needs like caregiving or shift work?
Well, okay, that's a very fair question. But just before I address it, I just wanted to backtrack a little bit because, yes, our CO system has been in place since the 90s, but it's not the exact system that was in place. There are some tweaks in there along the way. For example, taxis at some point in time, people had to bid for their COEs to get a taxi in. But now you can bring a taxi in, you just have to pay the equivalent. So there are changes here and there and sort of categories for small cars and things like that, small tweaks that had arrived here. So it's not like the system is totally, just from the 90s without any tweaks. It had been tweaked. And so, but the basic system, the basic idea still works. And all you need to do is to take a visit at some of the nearby capital cities within ASEAN and maybe during some peak hours and experience what it's like without a COE being really stuck in traffic. And when I say stuck in traffic there, your car really don't move a lot, unless what we have in Singapore, where you kind of move along and gradually you kind of get to where you go. So it's a real difference.
So I want to take up that point because there is an example that contradicts what Terence just said.
Okay.
Let's take Hong Kong, another global city, right? It's very similar to Singapore. Hong Kong has about 7.5 million people. Singapore has about 6. They have about 922,000 cars there. We have about shade over a million. They have about 645,000 private cars. We have about 657. So it's a very close approximation. Even though Hong Kong is about 1.5 times larger than Singapore, they only have about 2,241 kilometers of road. We are 52% smaller than Hong Kong, but we have 9,000 over kilometers of road. So the government has done an extraordinary job addressing road usage. The problem here is when I do a straw poll among my Hong Kong friends who have been here as well, they say traffic is really bad in Hong Kong, but when they experience our peak time traffic, they say not much difference. And here's the thing, they don't have COEs in Hong Kong. They don't. Cars in Hong Kong cost 441% less than in Singapore. A BYD Atto costs about 41,000 there. It costs 173,000 here. So my point is, yes, I think we've done better than most ASEAN cities, but we're not comparing like for like. If we go with what Hong Kong is doing, another global city with far less roads, they have actually used another methodology to solve traffic congestion. And I would strongly urge for all of us to actually consider what they've done.
Right. Well, Kwee Neng, you proposed injecting equity into the COE system, but who decides whose needs are more deserving without creating a mechanism that is open to abuse?
So I think my position is not injecting equity into the COE system so much as taking out inequities. Because right now the bidding of COEs are largely controlled by corporations. So my position is very simple. Let's take out the inequities of the COE bidding system so that we can actually have a fairer play. Now, when I look at the usage of land, two things spring to mind: housing, and of course, the roads, right? The COEs. And Assembly has said that COEs is a proxy for land space. Now, when I look at housing, the government intervenes aggressively and very often when things don't go right. Why? Because they want to make sure that the social outcomes for Singaporeans are kept in check. So foreign speculation is taken out of the equation. But for some strange reason, there's another principle operating for the other usage of land, which is cars. They don't intervene at all. And whilst Terence say that there's been a lot of changes in the COE system, these are very minor tweaks. And I'll say this point. The HDB does a fantastic job coming with a plethora of housing options to meet every single economic need of Singaporeans. Every strata of the country, they would have housing options for them. But for the COE, there is very precious few options available for people of different economic strata. And so that's the other point. It's about social equity. To me, it's actually about accessibility to the market. Do Singaporeans have enough accessibility to the market? Back in the day when we started COE in 1990, there were 5 categories of COE. Small cars, medium cars, large cars, luxury cars.
Right.
And there was accessibility. So all I'm saying is that we may have to look at the issue of accessibility to address the issue of social equity once again. Yeah.
Well, speaking of accessibility here, the government has long promoted public transport as a viable alternative to cars. From the expansion of train lines to more bus routes in neighborhoods and beyond our shores, Singapore's transport system is also no stranger to global praise. It's ranked 12th in the 2025 Time Out list, boasting a highly efficient MRT network, affordable fares, and spotless stations. So, Kwee Neng, public transport here is already subsidized and expanding. Wouldn't, reforming the COE system distract from improving public solutions that benefit far more people?
So let's look at some numbers. The Ministry of Transport receives about close to 3 billion Singapore dollars in annual public transport subsidies to keep bus and train services running. So although no official numbers are actually available from the government, it would be fair to assume that the tax revenue generated by COE's car taxation is probably used to keep public transport affordable and running. Now, for the financial year 2024, the government expects to collect about $7.57 billion in revenue. And I'm quite sure some of it will be used to help make public transport more accessible. So it's actually in the interest of public transport that we get the COE game right, because they're getting so much subsidies from the private transport sector. It is not sustainable as it is right now. There has to be a point where things actually has to grow better. And it's totally in the benefit for public transport system that we get our sums correct for the private transport system if the subsidy system are actually applied that way.
Okay.
Now, I just want to touch on this point is that the government added 20,000 pieces of COE in October 2024 because they say that the transport patterns of Singapore have shifted post-COVID. Now, that means that if transport patterns can be further altered, more COEs will be released. So I have a really simple mathematical example. Say 100 pieces of COE cost $1 right now. The government is taking in 100 pieces of COE cost $10. So the government is bringing $1,000 revenue for Singaporeans. But what if, because we are able to nudge transport patterns, the government can release 150 pieces of COEs instead of 100, and the COE prices drops from $10 to $8. It means that the government will collect $1,200 in revenue, much more than what they've done in the past. So expanding COEs actually would work in favor of the government's coffers if we're able to nudge transport patterns so that car usage is only on an as-is and urgent basis rather than as the only choice for some people right now.
Right. Well, given... Yes,
Well,
Terence.
going back to my loaf and bread analogy, I hear Kwee Neng trying to stretch the dough in various different directions. And guess what? If you stretch it too much in one direction, you will break it, and the other direction you get less of the dough because it's just the same amount of land we have at the end. So yes, I agree the point in Hong Kong they don't have a COE, but guess what? One car park lot can cost like $1 million. So people pay out of your left pocket or right pocket one way or another. If you don't want COE at some point, you may have to pay very expensively for your parking. So I think that's a trade-off that Singapore has chosen to not go down that route and to actually have it fairer so that you more or less have a park even in many of the public estates, but you have to pay up front the COE. So that's the choice that we have. And so far, it's sort of worked quite well. And because we're dividing something that inherently is scarce, it's just not enough to go around. So we kind of have to cut it some ways. So using a bidding system in several categories of vehicles, that's sort of the way that seems to have worked. And remember, during the financial crisis, COE prices have dropped to near zero at some point. So it's not like it's always catastrophically high. So it depends on when you buy the vehicle, and maybe you just have the time, the purchase timing, so that it's just less costly. So in that sense, it's fair in a large sense. It's no more unfair than to say that Singapore needs more rainwater to begin with. So that's the view that I have on these. You know?
I think it's indisputable that high COE prices directly or indirectly affecting the cost of living for Singaporeans. I think the fact that the Monetary Authority of Singapore keeps core inflation to exclude accommodation and private transport costs is pretty telling. And both of them are actually key usage of land in Singapore. High COE prices also eats up a chunk of the household budget for people whose usage of a car is a necessity, not a luxury. And high COE prices also take the aspirational dreams of the younger people away from them because what was accessible to us now is no longer accessible to them. And for me, I think we need to weigh up, the cost benefits in a more holistic way rather than purely from economic viewpoint, because the social costs of some of these exercises, I think, bears accounting for.
I mean, when we talk about cost, well, first of all, the reason why we would want more public transport is in terms of the usage of the road, you can pack a lot more people per square foot or square meter of road if we house them in a bus or even better on train. So that's inherently a lot more efficient in terms of using roads. So if you want to give everyone or every household a vehicle, then you will need a lot more road space just to accommodate that. So that's the basic premise why we go for that. And in this day and age of being environmentally conscious, using public transport, even though 90% of our electricity actually comes from burning, some sort of natural gas, it is still a lot more closer to if we were to use electric vehicles en masse, just to give everyone an electric vehicle. Because packing people in public transport, it's more efficient for the road use space, but it's also more efficient to use the energy to such an extent that it actually compares quite well with just a normal sedan, but 100% electric vehicle. So that's sort of the reason behind, the sort of the penchant towards public transport. So that's the basics. Of course, what's left of it for public transport, for cars and so on, then we have the COE system, which effectively will have to depend on some sort of monetary, division, because otherwise it's a scarce commodity. It's the same loaf of bread. You want to stretch one way, you're going to get less of it in the other. So I think we're quite happy with, or many people are quite happy with the trade-off we have.
So ChatGPT tells me that a world-class transport system is characterized by its efficiency, reliability, accessibility, and affordability, ensuring seamless movement of people and goods. It integrates various modes of transport, incorporates sustainable practices, and leverages technology for optimization. On every single one of those definitions, the Land Transport Authority has done an amazing job. But nowhere there does it say that cars are a no-no, because it is also another form of transportation. All we're requesting is for a more open-minded way of looking at cars and looking at its usage, rather than saying we don't need more cars. Maybe what we should do is consider cars as another good alternative for point-to-point transport, bearing in mind that when you have an aging population, the need for point-to-point transportation actually rises. And some families actually require a vehicle to do multiple tasks, ferrying kids, ferrying parents. So, grabbing for all your needs can be an entirely expensive exercise and fairly inconvenient during rush hours as well. So all we're saying is that if you want a world-class transport system, consider how to make every single element more holistic and better run.
Well, if we go back to the point of accessibility, which I hear a lot, actually our public transport system is so comprehensive and the cost is not very, it's actually one of the most affordable around the world. So in terms of having that system being, to make people being accessible to that system, I think that itself is a huge, achievement.
But I think the mindset should not be, we want to make public transport the only transportation mode. everybody stay away from cars. I think there needs to be a more holistic balance so that cars are also seen to be something that can contribute to the system rather than something that needs to be punished in order for public transport to be sustained. Yeah.
Well, these days we're also quite lucky because if someone needs a vehicle, they don't have to go and own it outright.
Yes.
So there are
Which
car
is
rental
different.
firms, there are private hire hailing companies, and also increasingly there are car sharing companies, which means that you rent a vehicle, but you don't rent it for the whole month. You rent it just for a few hours, And depending on when you rent that vehicle for a few hours, you may be able to get the prices down to very affordable level. So we're very fortunate to have this spectrum of companies that stepped into this place, so that having to use a vehicle these days does not mean that you have to go and buy one.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually access one through many of these means. And one of the, I think, if I look at the largest car sharing company in Singapore, apparently they have thousands of locations all across the islands where you can get your vehicles. So it's actually very accessible in many different ways, however way we want to look at it.
Ironically, those solutions to accessibility also directly contribute to greater congestion because these cars are actually on the move all the time, whereas private ownership of cars, these cars are only being used some of the time. So I hear what the acting minister was saying, that he rather the COE be used by cars that can be accessed by many people. But at the same time, I think there are people who prefers the option of having their own vehicle and of transportation, but that option now with the COE system is increasingly taking away from them, and I think that's pretty punitive for a policy direction.
Definitely. I think we've had some great perspectives on both sides here. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So thank you so much both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been speaking to Kwee Neng, who is the managing partner at One Strategic Consulting, and Terence Phan, who's the assistant professor of strategy and entrepreneurship at the Lee Kong Chian School of Business at SMU. Tune in again next week for another hot seat. I've been your host, Hongbin Jeong.
Introducing BYD's first ever plug-in hybrid SUV, the Sea Lion 6 DMI.